Very well. Good afternoon. Buon pomeriggio to the audience, both in presence and also that is following us on Zoom. I'm Diego Manton, and I'm very glad to host this conference that, together with the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities at the Ca' Foscari University in Venice, we are devoting to a book presentation, but actually very much to, I hope, a quite lively debate, having the opportunity to meet Professor Pamela Brown, who has been so kind to us as to be here to speak not just about her latest book that deals with the influences, the continental influences on Shakespearean theatre, but particularly on the role and the function that women roles and women actresses had in the development of theatre history from the beginning at the Renaissance, in the Renaissance, and then especially in a very strange setting like that of the theatre at the time of Elizabeth I, when, as you definitely know, women were not allowed, at least English women, were not allowed to act, to be on the public stage. And something that strikes, I believe, anyone who reads or sees some movies today of Shakespeare's plays or tragedies, first of all, Romeo and Juliet, it is almost incredible to us today, thinking that such strong female characters at the time were not played by women, but by very young boys. So how is it possible? This is basically the question that Pamela Brown is trying to answer in her book for Oxford University Press, coming out this week. So it's really a preview, and we're extremely glad and honored to have her here for this. The book is essentially dealing with how is it possible that such strong women characters are female characters take center stage in theater and in the public arena, thanks to Shakespearean theater. And the answer, as we will try to unravel today, also with the help of our discussants, Shaul Bassi and Rosaria Ruffini, is really that of setting the theater, English theater at the time of Elizabeth I, in a much wider cultural context. And probably even, definitely much wider than probably today's Prime Minister would like to hear. So it is far beyond the White Cliffs of Dover, so beyond the borders of historical England. The answer here is that in Renaissance, and then in the 17th century especially, the development of theatrical languages, of roles, of characters, plots, canovaccis, really depended on traveling troupes of actors and actresses, especially of actresses, which was quite a novelty. And that this derived especially from the experiences of Italian divas. And the Diva's Gift, as the title of the book goes, really starts from the idea that a few actresses experienced in the roles they were playing really started about a revolution, not just in theatrical language, but also in wider society. What the book of Pamela Brown is really trying, not just trying to suggest, but demonstrates, is that having women on the public stage, because the theatrical stage beyond the borders of the closed courts is public, is for the broader audience, and has an influence on costumes, on roles, on how society perceives the other, and in this very case, gender and diversity. having women becoming professionals in theater, as the book goes, breaks an incredible taboo, that of a woman that suddenly can become independent from male power because she is earning a living with her own profession, becoming an artisan of herself on the public stage. We decided to have this book presentation as the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities because reflecting on this theater history is very important to the strategies of publicness that are also in today's, under today's scrutiny in the entertainment business and in general in the performing arts. What goes on stage, in fact, is not only in the public eye, but soon it takes center stage in the wider public arena, in society, in public debates, in the way people perceive of what is going on. So what goes on stage, both at the time of Shakespeare as well as today, sooner or later becomes morally acceptable and socially legitimate within society. And as this book demonstrates, it often also becomes geographically transferable between different national societies. Because as the book suggests, the plays and tragedies by Shakespeare and his contemporaries could not be imagined if it wasn't for the contamination, for the interconnections with the European continent, their practitioners, their actors, their actresses, their playwrights, and as Pamela Ellen Brown demonstrated, especially without the divas that emerged in European theater. We will seem to speak just of the past, but we're really speaking also of what is possible today, because these kind of debates, how much the borders of morality and legitimacy in the social sphere can be broadened, is very much at stake also in today's entertainment business and in the performing arts. Today we were speaking just before the conference with the discussants, and it came to my mind, I just read very recently an interview to a very famous and beloved actor, Eddie Redmayne. Some of you may know him because he is the lead character in Fantastic Beasts and so by J.K. Rowling. So the successor of Harry Potter. Eddie Redmayne in 2015 presented at the Venice Film Festival a movie that got very much criticized at the time, both in a good and in a bad way, called The Danish Girl, where he played a trans character. Just a few days ago, he released an interview stating that it was a mistake playing a trans character without being a trans person. So this brings us back to a stage, the Shakespearean stage, a stage that is speaking a lot of women, strong women, foolish women, but without women playing them. How much this helped probably English women to get center stage in society and innovate the roles in society, even without being on stage. And how at some point, after a few years or sometimes a few decades, it isn't socially acceptable anymore to have someone play something that he or she isn't. As we will hear also with our discussants, Shakespeare's theater still today gives us the opportunity to question and investigate very fluid roles that tell us something even today of where our society is going, how open it is, how diverse it is, and how diversity really can take the center stage in theater and then be bridged over to wider society. Permettetemi anche una breve introduzione in italiano, dato che finalmente abbiamo la possibilità di fare una presentazione con pubblico in presenza, dopo un anno e mezzo di tantissimi convegni, conferenze, incontri online. La fortuna è stata di avere Pamela Ellen Brown in Italia e quindi la volontà di portarla anche a Venezia per parlarne in presenza. Forse perché lo spettacolo dal vivo si deve fare e bisogna parlarne anche dal vivo, a braccio, come noteremo, e come forse si è sempre fatto. E quindi alcune parole per spiegare il motivo di questa presentazione, ma in realtà di questa conferenza e di questo dibattito che si svilupperà tra l'autrice Pamela Ellen Brown e i nostri discussants Shaul Bassi e Rosaria Ruffini. Come centro di ricerca d'eccellenza che si occupa di Digital and Public Humanities, questo libro, The Diva's Gift, che esce questa settimana per Oxford University Press, è l'occasione ideale per parlare di public art e public arts, e cioè in particolare come le arti dello spettacolo, pur partendo da un caso storico, quello del teatro elisabettiano, e delle influenze fortissime che ha avuto dal teatro di derivazione continentale, in particolare italiana, fossero all'epoca e siano ancora oggi, seppur nelle derivazioni più tecnologiche, mediatiche, televisione, cinema, piuttosto che altre aree della digitalità, siano un public stage, una piazza pubblica, un palcoscenico pubblico, in cui ciò che viene portato in scena prima o poi finisce anche per rinnovare o innovare i sentimenti di una società nei confronti di determinati temi, spesso scottanti, spesso che hanno a che fare anche con l'emancipazione di genere, di diversità, di ruoli all'interno della società. E ricordavo come, pur parlando oggi, partendo dal Rinascimento fino a interpretazioni contemporanee e regie contemporanee di Shakespeare, questi aspetti del portare in scena, che vengono trattati nel libro, importanti ruoli femminili in un teatro come quello elisabettiano, in cui le donne non possono esibirsi in pubblico, ancora oggi dimostri la difficoltà, o meglio, i diversi passi o passaggi che sono necessari per portare in scena e fare innovazione sociale attraverso lo spettacolo. E ricordavo il caso di un attore molto noto, Eddie Redmayne, che alcuni appunto conosceranno per, se non mi ricordo il titolo in italiano, Animali fantastici e dove trovarli o qualcosa del genere, il seguito di Harry Potter o il prequel, quello che nel 2015 al Festival del Cinema di Venezia presentò The Danish Girl, in cui interpretava una persona trans, probabilmente il primo trans al mondo che si sottopose a diverse operazioni fra gli anni 20 e 30 del Novecento. Un'intervista rilasciata pochi giorni fa in cui dichiara essere stato un errore aver accettato un ruolo che invece sarebbe stato giusto, pur avendo parlato al grande pubblico, aver introdotto questo tema del transgender, in realtà ritiene adesso, visto lo sviluppo che c'è stato nel dibattito pubblico, ritiene oggi essere stato un problema aver tolto di fatto quel ruolo a un attore o un'attrice trans che in maniera, forse non è giusto dire più veritiera, ma che avrebbe giustamente dovuto e meritato di poter interpretare quel ruolo. Ecco che questo ci riporta al dibattito di oggi e in particolare al libro di Pamela Ellen Brown, a cui passo volentieri la parola per la sua presentazione. So we will now go over to our author, Pamela Ellen Brown. Again, thank you very much for joining us here physically in Venice. And please, the floor, both in presence and digital, is yours for the presentation of your book.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. I'm here physically, but I think mentally I'm floating very high up in the sky because this is a place where the Diva made, a lot of them made their names, performed, had debuts of all kinds. And I'm very honored to be here. And I'm going to thank Diego, Shaul, Rosario, everyone else who made it possible. My book, The Diva's Gift, started out with a different title, Diva Envy. Diva Envy, and somebody said, oh, play on words, maybe a little bawdy. I think it should be more serious. I come out of studies of comedy more than tragedy, and it turned out that in the course of doing my book, tragedy became a very important subject in it that I hadn't truly studied before. Most of my writing has been on women and humor, women and satire, women and jesting, joking as speaking subjects in terms of comic performance. And so the Diva's gift, one of the gifts is that of seriousness and gravity and different kinds of emotion that had not been portrayed before in the professional troupes, the comici, what later were called the commedia dell'arte. So I just wanted to say that I've come to it through looking at the Diva as a multi-generic artist. That's really my message. So when I decided to, on the cover of this book, you can see that it is, well, maybe you don't know, I'll tell you, this is not a picture of an actress that I know of. It is a portrait by Lippi, and it's called Allegory of Simulation. And I thought it was very appropriate because of the mystery, because she's a stranger, because she crosses our path without an answer. She arouses questions, and she passes by. She doesn't give answers. Allegories are like that. Allegorical paintings are there to be deciphered. And of course, you see the mask. That's an obvious thing. Is she putting it on or taking it off? Why is it dark, so much darker than her face? So I'm going to talk about race and racialization today. What is that pomegranate? Of course, the pomegranate in the myth of Persephone is the gift of death. That is that a fatal gift she's giving to us, or is it just a piece of fruit? It's also a symbol of unity in actually complexity within unity, with the outside of the fruit holding together all of those seeds. So she's offering us, it looks like offering us a gift, but what is that gift and what do we make of it? What did they make of it then? I'm saying the gift is the gift of her artistry, her creativity, and her boldness, audacity, even her scandalous strangeness. So that's how I want to begin with those questions. And I'll just point to something that Shaul Bassi wrote in his wonderful book, Shakespeare's Italy, Italy's Shakespeare. And that's my first quotation. From Iago says, I know our country disposition well. And he's talking about the disposition of Venetian wives. A country disposition, this is Shaul, is the norms we take for granted, a bias, a horizon within which we operate undoubtingly until we cross a different disposition, which may generate tension, friction, anxiety, hostility, sometimes admiration, and which at best may lead to questioning our own prejudices. And I think that's, I like the proportions there that are spelled out. We can count on the stranger, the one who crosses the country disposition that we hold to be normal, with tension and anxiety and perhaps admiration. And I think that's true of how the English received and interpreted and used the model of the diva. There's another critic, Richard Andrews, who's a noted comparatist and Italianist. He calls it revolutionary, the advent of women in professional troupes in Italy, especially those who rose to stardom. They appeared in the 1560s. A few quickly rose to stardom, and Andrews calls their advent and acceptance, and I think acceptance is a very big word there, a revolutionary phenomenon which the Italians introduced to Western performing art in the teeth of formidable opposition. Okay, and so what is so radical about this? You know, so boys in Italy, you may or may not know, female roles were played by boys or men in the Capitolarte troops from when they were formed in the 1540s to the 1560s, also in the academies and courts where there were erudita dramas played. Boys and young men also played the female roles. Okay, so this is something quite new. The novelty was what was chiefly noted about it at the beginning. And here's a map that I put together about how they broke through to international markets. When did the troupes with divas actually cross the Alps and then cross over to Spain? They went northeast. They actually went to Linz, Prague, and Vienna. A troupe, the Ganassa troupe, went in the late 1560s, you know, and 1570 was a real turning point, because after that, other troops, other leading troops, the Gelosi among them, decided to turn their ambitions to Paris and to France. So they crossed the Alps, they went to Lyon, they played in Lyon, they established a kind of base there, then they went to Paris, and they had great success in Paris at the court of Charles IX. There, the king's brother, who would become Henri III, who later came to Venice and sort of had a command performance of a diva for him. That all happened in the early 1570s. If you notice up at the top, there is remote London, right? It says 1578, but recent research has come out, I'm very glad to say, that has moved that date back to 1574, that troupes with actresses came to England and performed for Elizabeth. So this is a big part of my answer to the question, how did the English know about the diva? How did it, not just the diva, but that women performing in all roles. There are many other female roles, as you probably know, Balia, Franceschina, La Cortegiana, there are other La Ruffiana. So playing these female roles. At times there were men playing some of the comic female roles as well. So there could be a combination, but with the inamorata role, the woman in love, the inamorata accesa, the inamorata would be played by a woman. So this is the role that I focus on in my book, that the inamorata is one of the diva's gifts. And how can this be so, since there were women in love in Italian drama before women took over these roles? And that's what I explain in my first chapter. I won't go into it a lot right now, but I can in the question period if you like. But I think that the main thing is that they brought far greater emotional range. They played unmasked, and they moved the love stories and the lovers, the innamorati, to the center of plots. That was the impact they had on these erudita dramas that they pieced together, and that they improvised. I mean, improvisatory dramas that they created. So we have this map in which we see, it's quite early that we see this spread across all of Europe. And so this is the transnational that Diego was just talking about, the transnational reach of this this spectacle and this novelty of women playing women, which we take for granted now, but it was once a historical novelty. It was performing of something, a street spectacle. It was something to run and go see, and was quite scandalous in certain ways, right? It was received with many parts with hostility and with attacks. They were often put down as whores. They were just whores performing. You know, they perform in bed and they perform on stage. So the equation of actress and whore goes to this point. I'll just move to the next one, because I think, let me see if this is still working. Yes, okay. So here let's get down to the street level. I love this slide. I love this image. Unfortunately, I couldn't get permission. I couldn't find the original for it for my book, but I wanted to show it today because it shows a troupe entering a town. So it's not playing, but it's parading. And it's something that Diego, I saw Diego's performance of a flower parade. I love the idea of transforming the streetscape through the entry of a different disposition, sort of to link together the shawl idea that there is such a difference in this concatenation of types of people, of actors' bodies, and they're not quite in character, yet they're not quite not in character, they're in costume, and they're advertising themselves. And the very interesting thing is that they advertise themselves with the divas, with the lead inamorata, playing a drum. And so if you see that little, what she's carrying there, it's a enter a city. Now, you know, that will wake you up, right? And the fact that the Anamorata played the drum and not Arlecchino, right? Which would be the clown in front, I'm sure in Venice, you know, Arlecchino, that she's carrying a drum. I think that the veiled Inamorata would be the seconda donna, so prima donna, seconda donna, is also carrying a drum and a little dog, a little puppy, which was often, they often had little dogs on stage with them. There's Pantalone, there's the Capitano, right? We have Zani. So we have this spectacle in which a town is transformed. You know, they are creating a new identity or a new possibility, let's put it that way, that is in itself a performance, the parade. As they come into town. One of the divas, one of the greatest early divas, Vincenza Armani, it is said that when she entered a town, cannons would go off. They must have said, okay, time to, you know, I wanted to have a little recording of a cannon so I could really startle you, but boom, I just imagine Vincenza Armani coming into town. I think that's a marvelous idea of keeping it to the street level and to how it actually affects the concept of what women and what the gender is capable of in terms of ambition and public spectacle. And so here we would. So I'll just go on. I could talk about that for a little longer. So what is the revolution? So the revolution. I'm supposed to stick to Shakespeare. So I love the Italian part of my book that I would, but I want to move to the Shakespeare thesis, because that's what really that's what the heart of my book is about. How did the English know, and when did they know it? And if you're as old as I am, you will recognize that as from the Watergate hearings. What did they know? What did they know, and how did they know it? The English, you're Italians, I think you're probably, I think probably most of you are Italians or scholars from elsewhere who are not English. Maybe there are a few English people here. But the English Shakespeareans, I'll have to tell you, are quite resistant to the idea that they owe anything to anyone, no, to other cultures, especially to Italy. As manifest as many sources, et cetera, that there are in terms of acting, in terms of performance. There's a really strong line. There's not much known about the actors of the continent, for example, and how they toured in England. If you study cross-channel performance, it will talk about English actors on the continent, but not vice versa. But that's beginning to change with my book and other books that are coming out. So how did the revolution in female performance come to England? Okay, I'm sure you can read my highlighted ones. It was especially in the 1570s, the Elizabeth's diplomats see mixed troupes who are performing at the court in Paris, and Paris becomes a real entrepot. It becomes a place for knowledge to flow to England. Much easier to get to Paris than to Italy or to Venice, although there are reports from Venice as well, and from Italy. The 1574 is this crucial date because it seems that Elizabeth is feeling very competitive with Catherine de' Medici and the Medici spectacles at the Valois court. And suddenly there's a troupe, an Italian troupe playing an avant-garde pastoral, which Rob Henke says strongly, it's very very probable that it is, it's in the Aminta style, and Aminta had just premiered the year before, 1573. So we have this, this new avant-garde pastoral that, and we have records of that pastoral, and the prop list is very interesting, the Wild Man and the Satyr. So during this period, then there are more troupes that come. The biggest troupe is the Martinelli Troupe, and they stay the longest. That's 1577 and 78. So this troupe with actresses comes and they stay at the beginning of the period. There's an outraged city father in London who says, we must stop because the beastly, shameless tumbling of the Italian women is corrupting our men and keeping people from church. So the beastly, shameless tumbling, because the Italian troops, all of them had for their tours, they would have acrobatics, music, dancing, and plays, comedies, and some pastorals. Those would be interludes, they would call other pieces, but there was a mix affair, obviously. And that helped with the language difficulty as well. So we have an account of the Martinellis. I think is really crucial because this is when the English stage, the commercial stage, is becoming established. The theaters start opening their doors and trying to make money and filling these huge theaters. At the same period that the Italians have had a 5-year period of visits. So this is the heart of my historical argument for the knowledge coming. But if you see at the bottom of my page, and there are more troupes that come later, at the bottom of the page, I say all of these writers and artists. We have Inigo Jones, obviously. We have Will Kemp, George Gascoigne. We have Thomas Sackville, who was a co-author of Gorboduc. If you know anything about English drama, you realize these are some very influential, very important writers, creators, and artists. Come to Italy and live here for a while, and when they come back, they write about the comici. They write about the Italian actors, and so it's or they imitate them, or they use in their art, they imitate them. So we have this certainly this oral and this connection between the theater professionals in England, and this is in the decade before Shakespeare comes to town, but we have very important predecessors like Lilly, George Peele, Christopher Marlowe, and Thomas Kidd are imbued with this influx of Italian models and methods. So they clearly know that some of their rivals are women by the time Shakespeare begins to write. Okay. So here we have the troupe that actually was in England, in London in 1577-8. On the left is Tristano Martinelli, who is the first Arlequin. And this is, well, she's not named in the picture. I'm almost sure I'm almost positive she would be playing opposite her because it's their troupe, the Angelica Martinelli and a Bali I have not been able to name. And Angelica was a famous, what would you call it? She was notorious because she was married to Tristano Martinelli's brother, Luciano, who led the troupe, but she was also the lover, the mistress of their patron, the Prince of Mantua. So it was openly known. It was not a secret cuckolding. In fact, Luciano would sign his letters, Signor Angelica. So this was part of the, I think that scandal was actually part of the marketing of the troupes. The idea that this presented something very new in terms of female sexuality and mobility and really audacity, okay? Not every diva took this route, but I think Angelica did. So what did the English do with this? And what was the model and what did they do with it, okay? Well, what they found, like when the Italians came to London, we're talking about the 1570s, there'd been decades of English theater with women in the theater. So what women's roles, I mean. but they were very small roles. They were marginal, and half of all plays had no women at all. I think this is an extremely important point. The idea that you have an all-male stage with boys playing women, and half of all plays didn't even feel the need to have a single female role. After the Italians are there, after 1576, I believe, there is no play without a woman in it. And also they begin to Italianize in terms of romances, lively comedies. When you say romance, when you say lively comedy, you mean Italian material. And so this great influx of Italian plots starts, you see none before 1578. After the Martinelli leaves, within 6 months, there's the Three Sisters of Mantua. There's an Italian comedy suddenly with 3 pairs of innamorati, and there's nothing like it before that date. And it happens to be Mantua, right? Associated with the Martinelli. So when the main thesis of my book is that you see this influence in every genre. We have Lilly, we have Pastoral by John Lilly, we have Shakespearean comedy and tragedy, and we also have Websterian tragedy, but other playwrights are in there too. That was just for my example of the span, the extension through the 3 genres, the 3 Renaissance genres, but there are other experimental tragicomedies as well that show this influence. And certainly, I think that if we have to see how it's adapted, I think there's a crucial moment at which they are they're taking on more and more of the Italian style and the Italian materials, but still keeping out women. I don't think there was a meeting where they all said, okay, we're going to do this. I think that the result was that they continued to use boys, but they changed the roles to be far more in the mold of what the divas were doing with the inamorata role. And that's what I spend the rest of my book trying to prove, to demonstrate. Okay, going through the different, and I talk about many more authors than Shakespeare, but he's probably half the book, I'd say. So what are the divas' gifts? I think that's important, right? The book is called The Divas' Gifts. You may well ask, what are those gifts? I think that it's not simply glamour, and it's so interesting that in Italian, unless Shawl or Rosaria or Diego could tell me, there's not really a word for glamour, right? What would you say? Vaghezza? Vaghezza? What would you say? What? Claro.
No, glamour.
Glamour, because they just take it from, okay. But glamour is actually an interesting word because it means a trick veil in some Scott derivation to render the subject invisible. A trick veil, or some magic, right? So to confuse your eyes. It's very interesting, that word. So I would say beyond glamour, variety and versatility in terms of what offering to theater, variety of different kinds of roles, variety in performance, versatility of being able to, in one season, do many different kinds of genres, but within one role, like or within, say, a mad scene, to, with great versatility and fluidity, go into altered states that are radically different or even opposing within seconds, right? So versatility, variety, very important. You also think about the commedia dell'arte, if you've ever seen them in Carnevale or ever seen a performance. It's not actually performed that much anymore, sadly. That the masked male characters are clowns, and that the clowning that goes on is very much due to the mask, to the kinds of masks they wear, whereas the lovers are unmasked. So you just think about the distinction, the strangeness of a theatrical troupe in which some are unmasked and some are masked. And I've always thought about Disney World. You go to Disney World, you see the parade in Disney World. The princesses are unmasked, and then all of these animal characters and other Disney characters have massive body mass. But it's as if this ontological difference is simply ignored. It's fine to have women or young girls, princesses, be unmasked in their own face as if they're already masked. So I think it's a very important idea concerning woman, or maybe the lovers as well. The prince too, I suppose, is unmasked. So the divas quickly shaped an autonomous, outspoken inamorata, displacing the Virgo. And if there are people, I'm sure there are people here who study classical drama, and the Virgo, that the Virgo was mostly passive, often mute, sometimes entirely off stage in classical drama, even in Plautus. And there were some active Virgos, a few, but mostly the Virgo was a counter traded between men. It was the real conflict was between the father and son. So here we have this very important alteration of conflicts, as in Romeo and Juliet, being between father and daughter. That's the real conflict of Romeo and Juliet. And this comes from an Italian predecessor, where the Anamorata is truly the center of the play because her erotic choices matter, and because she has agency and chooses her mate, right? That makes a very different plot than with the Virgo, right? They were elegant in the sense, sort of in a class sense, they performed outside of their how they were born. None of them were born into Tuscan-speaking families, but they spoke High Tuscan, literary Tuscan, and they seemed graceful, poetic, and refined, which was a permanent mask, off stage and on, right? They're hyperliterary. They could perform scripted, erudited drama. They could memorize drama. Some of them did write poetry and drama, and they could compose their own material, poetic improvisation, etc., dramatic improvisation. That's hyperliterary skill. They could be bawdy and violent, as well as, the refinement was like the baseline, but sometimes they lost it all, which made a wonderful spectacle, and were very bawdy, tearing off clothes or stabbing someone. They could have great passion in that way. They were known to improvise with greater skill than the males in their troupe. They're often complimented for their great improvisation. I think we see that reflected in English drama that imitates. And then all divas had special. That's how you become a diva. After all, you have special skill. You can speak in other languages. You have great singing skill. That's why some of the early divas were chosen to be the first divas of opera, the first to premiere by Monteverdi and others in operas. So we have these pezzi pregiati. Mad Scene is one of them. Lamenti, sung lamenti. Sometimes there are pezzi pregiati of cross-dressing back and forth between male and female. And so this is what distinguishes a diva. Not every actress can do this, but it's also her fame, her charisma, her ability to attract an audience, and I think her ambition, especially in tragedy. So when the English, and I think this is, the core of my book, because I'm saying that when Shakespeare and others emulate, when they do emulate the diva-driven inamorata part, it's an interesting dual motion of emulation and Italianation. That emulation does not necessarily mean Anglifying or Englishing, although it has more to do with rendering strange and, to me, putting a focus on their Italianate qualities, and then on the other hand, making the boy who plays them more exotic and more sexual, actually eroticizing the boy in an Italianate way. So we have emulation, sort of bad and good, and I'll go more into that, hostile and more benign. And then there's also the Italianation of the boy, which is an entire chapter in my book. And I can talk more about that later if you're interested in that. When they stress her foreignness, I think that it is racialized in the sense of Italianness being racialized by the English. They're Southern, they're Catholic, they're passionate, they're violent. These are the elements of racialization that don't have to do with skin color, though sometimes they're called swarthy and dark, essentially. Not all of them, but some of them. And then if there's a very fair Desdemona, or white devil quality, the idea of being a white outside and dark inside, morally dark, is projected onto the Italian woman. often. So we have, but we have, as sort of in the more positive vein, by alluding to the boy actress, as we know from the Cleopatra's, talking about the boy at the end of her life, or with Rosalind giving the epilogue, If I Were a Man, that bringing the boy actor into visibility and playing with that throughout the play, with androgyny, with hermaphroditism, with even a transgender avant la lettre, we have a heightened meta-theatricality and dramatic complexity that is you get in Shakespeare that you don't see quite the same way in Italian drama, although there's lots of cross-dressing. And then there's simply stardom. You know, you think about there aren't any stars among the boy actors in the way that the diva was a international star sought after by kings and dukes. This just didn't happen in Shakespeare's theater. The most famous actors were Burbage, Allen, Kemp. Some boys made their names and were complimented by, but they were not stars of the order of a Isabella Andreini or Vittoria Pissimi, or right. So there was this stardom that was written into the roles within Shakespeare, for example, of Cleopatra. She is a star, she's a celebrity and knows it. So that is a diva quality that I think is very important, whether or not you have a star to play Cleopatra. And I think Ophelia has this quality, Porsha, definitely Viola have this celebrity status, which is being imitated by and it's a real challenge for the boy actor. So if I just go through some of the gifts again, I think that, and I tried to narrow it down to the most important gifts. And I do think that the gift of tragedy, like that is truly groundbreaking, because if you can evoke pity, pathos, tears, pity and terror, catharsis, and I think Juliet does. And I think that the idea that ambition to play tragedy, to have that great the moral gravity that makes your own fate, which Castelvetro calls the singular quality of a tragic hero, that we have people like Sofonisba in Trissino, that Vittoria Pissimi plays here in Venice in, I think, 1582. She's the first professional actress to play a 5-act tragedy. And so we have this, this great boldness, ambition, and really you have to have an amazing rapport with your audience and a sense of the classical background, but also ambition to play tragedy in this way. And so what I found with the divas is that they created their own roles. They didn't just take something by Euripides or Sophocles or some Neo-Senecan drama from Italian tragedy, which were mostly extremely long and highly rhetorical and lots of just lamenti, lamenti. Instead, they would convert it into much more compelling, shorter 3-act or shorter tragic pieces with star scenes of running mad, star scenes of singing, star scenes of suicide and violence. So sex, violence, bodice stripping, but at the same time being able to move and cause people to suffer with you. That was something only a diva possessed. So we see that with coming into Shakespearean tragedy, Websterian tragedy, a character like Duchess of Malfi, I feel is very strongly influenced by this tragic ambition of the diva. And this is something that I'm going to do. I only have 2 days in Venice. I want to go see this. I think it's in the Accademia. This is Domenico Fetti's portrait that is influenced, is honoring Virginia Ramponi, who was Monteverdi's first Arianna, who was a great tragic actress and opera star. But it started out, of course, she was a Pena d'Arte actress in the Fedele troupe with G.B. Andreini. She was his wife, and he wrote many vehicles for her, including La Maddalena and this picture of melancholy. This is when I found this, I thought, aha, I finally found my female Hamlet. Here's a woman with a skull. I mean, what more could they ask for, right, Shaw? Here it is. In fact, I was told, like, you should put this on the cover of the book. Anyway, I think it's an absolutely wonderful portrait. So what do we have in England? So we have, coming over the 1580s, we have the biggest hit on the English stage. And if you're not really conversant with English theater, this is it. This is what Shakespeare took for Hamlet. Everybody stole from kids' Spanish tragedy, okay? It's been called the most popular play and the most quoted and memorized, most deep in the memory of the English as a revenge tragedy, the first great revenge tragedy. And the woman who kills for two lovers, she has two dead lovers, Don Andrea and her lover, who's Hieronymo's son, Horatio, they both die, and she avenges both of them by killing one of the killers on stage in a play within a play, playing an Italian dame, Persida. So she is extraordinarily theatrical, clever, self-willed, and she is she's an amazing tragic virago, not like any other character that anyone had seen before. And so Bellampiria, I think, is where I start my book and talk about the very famous line within the play, as Hieronymo writes his play for the play within the play, the blood play at the end. He says, you'll have to perform in this for what's a play without a woman in it. And I think alerting the English that they had better step up, because the Italians are really getting ahead of them. This last part is about Juliet. I think the gift of poetic genius and sprezzatura is something you see permeate the play Romeo and Juliet and many other plays, but I think Juliet is the first great Shakespearean tragic heroine. And here we have, I won't go through all of these, but I think she has many of the things I've gone through already. She is androgynous, she's girlish, boyish, and womanly. She's eager for sex at 13 because her Italianness is racialized. She's very artful. She loves acting. She sees love as a play. This dismal scene, I needs must act alone. I love that line. And so she basically is a star who relishes her a solo scenes, and she gives us ecstasy, frenzy, and suicide. And she makes us feel emotions that perhaps we've never felt in English drama on the English stage before. So opening that stage for foreign emotions. So my thesis is that she's both a fledgling diva and the stellar boy beneath. So this doubleness is always there in these diva influence roles. Here I have the grand diva Isabel Andreini. You can see her in her mannish doublet and her short hair. And then you can see a great boy actor, Stephen Hamerton, at the side with his gestures and his quite effeminate looks, who was once called the prettiest woman in the room. And so how these great stars, Hamerton he's in a smaller pond, but he was well known in his time. And what this gives an idea about what was going on, I think, a far more flexible stage than we are used to in our time. I think that the last gift I'm going to talk about is hot-blooded Southern passions, the idea of spectacular body and violence. We have on the left, we have Isabella Andreini's an image letter from her book Lettere, fictional Lettere. It looks like Medea because I think it is Medea, and it probably is a role that she played, crouching over the bodies of two young men, which are probably her children that she just killed. And so the tragic diva is very much identifying with these maddened women, right? And violent women. We have at the right, we have, and you can't really see it, we have the Anamorata beating Pantalone, whose pants are down, so we have the body violence. And I think that this takes me to Sicily, where my grandmother comes from. Beatrice of Messina in Much Ado, I think she's quite strongly, if you read Much Ado and look for allusions to Sicilian violence, passion, fury, you see that Beatrice is constantly talking about eating people. She's a cannibal. She has cannibalistic imagery throughout the entire play. And there's a stress on her dark hair and on her sun. She says, I am sunburnt. So there's I think a definite racialization. There's a strong notion in English culture that Sicilians were naturally jealous, revengeful, cunning, and ambitious, suspicious, and dangerous in conversation, lightly given to anger and offenses. And I think that there's this stereotype still, it is still present in culture today. Maybe not to the degree it was at this time, but one of my favorite lines of hers is, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. I wouldn't just kill Claudio, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. I love to hear that's pretty, okay. So anyway, this is a quotation by an English traveler who went to Messina and saw actresses. There they have their playhouses where the parts of women are acted by women, and too naturally passionated, which they forbear not to frequent upon Sundays. So they're irreligious, and they either overact or they are so naturally passionate they don't have to act. The idea is that they simply are themselves, right? They're not acting with any art, and this has been variously interpreted. But I do think we see that idea of excessive emotion in Beatrice as well. Far, far from the Castiglione courtier and his lady. So I want to end up with just the ideas of disturbing the peace. And this goes back to Shaw's point that crossing a different disposition is going to bring hostility, tension, anxiety, and disturbing the peace is what these players did. But I think that's very much something we want theater to do. We may not admit it, but we do want an alteration of our dispositions, a change in routine, even a shock, even a scandal, right? Here we have a picture of that seems to be the inamorata, or a courtesan with exposed breasts, lover, pantalone, etc. The interesting thing is that this has often been identified as Vittorio Pissimi, who's the great diva I told you about before, who played in tragedy. But when I went to Béziers to see this painting, it turned out that a later hand, like 100 years after, later 17th century, had repainted it to remove her dress to show her breasts. So this is kind of the fate of, the idea of beforing the actress happens even after their times. So you have to take things with a grain of salt, perhaps, but also realize that very much the glamour tends to blur the vision concerning things in the past that have to do with celebrity and certainly with performance. So I want to just end with these opposing ideas. Anti-theatricalist G.D. Ottonelli wrote volumes against actresses and say they must be banned from the stage, imprison them, take them away because they're destroying our citizens. But he said they're worse than whores because they can steal men's souls from the stage. A stage allows you to see many men, and you can an actress can steal their soul simply by looking at them. And therefore, the introduction of women into the theater to have been the invention and suggestion of the devil. So there was a protracted, formidable opposition, right? And here's a picture of Cleopatra. You can think of a character who was definitely tainted by her association or by her theatricality, dangerous, alluring, and super subtle. And I think Cleopatra, I have in the epilogue to my book, that Cleopatra is Italianate as well as Egyptian, and that she's very much a dark lady. Many diva types show the bias rooted in hostility towards strangers and theatrical women, yet they also attract curiosity, fascination, and desire. This is a thesis of Laura Bovilsky, who has a wonderful book. If you're interested in pursuing this, I can talk about it in the discussion. Diego drew on this quotation by Ciro Ferrone, who's a great scholar from Florence, and about the Advent is the most important innovation in Cinquecento European spectacle and one of the decisive factors in the formation of the theater of the professionals. The woman actor signaled a fundamental watershed in the history of manners, acquired a civil and artisanal persona unknown before this moment, and became a worker who asked for respect due to a professional calling. And I think that that's where we are today, yet to be an actress is still an endangered profession. It's not one that every parent wants their child to go into, you have to say that. And I'm not going to read this, I'm just going to sort of talk it through and put it there. And to say that in America, I was asking our panel, what is the connotation of diva in common usage today? And if I asked all of you, would diva be largely pejorative or mostly positive because it means star in Italian, or it means a diva of opera or film or theater, whereas it's an honorific, whereas in America, like my students or even people my age, it's a total put down. Diva means you're egotistical, you're such a diva, right? And there's a construction, but just any diva is not a good diva. And because so the idea of the diva's gift and it was counterintuitive, is meant to inspire engagement. And that's what I turn it over to you now and to our panelists, because I think that there's a great deal that we can not just learn, but to understand about theater through seeing how important this figure is to the history of theater, and how deserving of recognition and acknowledgement by a stage that managed to keep women out. I think after every other national theater, they didn't take women on until 1660, the English stage. So with that, I leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Pamela Allen Brown for your insight in this work of research that really stems from passion, I would say, really, over many, many years, and crossing also borders from Italy to America to the UK. And so please, let's open up the floor to our panelists. And the first one, definitely Shaul Bassi, who has been cited and who, as an expert of Shakespeare and his relationships to Italy and Italy's relationship in Shakespearean theater, we've asked him to be with us and read the Diva's Gift. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Center for Digital and Public Humanity and Ca' Foscari, the organizers, and thank you to the author for writing such an important and valuable book. So I'd like to make a few remarks on why I consider this book very important, very valuable, and also as a token of admiration, also raise a couple of critical points that I want to discuss with the author. So first of all, I think this is from the point of view of the Shakespearean, this is a very important book because it bridges the gap between Shakespeare studies and theater studies in many ways. There's clearly a huge amount of Shakespeare studies that clearly do not relate to theater studies as the history of performance, the history of Italian performance in particular. And one very salient, I think, thing is that the author says that this is not yet another source study. There are many books about Shakespeare's in Italy where Italy is treated very much like a wonderful library where Shakespeare goes, steals a couple of books, and then goes to the theater to stage them and create the memorable tragedies and comedies. So, you know, yeah, a few people read Bandello and then Shakespeare came and did the real thing so that everybody today knows Romeo and Juliet and don't know Bandello. So where Italy is almost like raw matter that becomes famous and legendary through Shakespeare. Also, I think she is absolutely right when she also claims that for many English scholars of Shakespeare, treating Italian matter almost as a kind of smokescreen that Shakespeare uses to address English issues without being pursued by censorship or incurring in political trouble. So as if, you can find in many places statements like, oh, Venice is a thinly veiled metaphor for London. So it's not about Venice, it's about London, where it's clearly also about London. Otherwise, there would be no interest in that, but it's also about Venice. So it's not an either or thing. So I admire and fully subscribe to the idea that this, that one should study Shakespeare in a kind of transnational perspective, and not only as Shakespeare becoming transnational when on the wings mostly of imperialism becomes a truly global phenomenon, but as someone who embodies a transnational traffic of ideas, of people, of theatrical practices, way before the globalization of Shakespeare. Another thing, guilty as charged, I am one of the many Shakespearean scholars who routinely tells his students, oh, there were no women on the English stage. I always say that, and of course I need to qualify that for the reasons that have been beautifully clarified here. Another quick point is that I love your characterization of Ophelia as a diva. And I liked it very much because in the book that you were, kind enough to quote, I take issue with a very influential reading, Italian reading of Ophelia by our former mayor of Venice, Massimo Cacciari, who's written a book on Hamlet, where he basically says, Ophelia is the only great character because she's silent. She doesn't speak, which of course is the type of woman that she likes, but that's a story. And I think there is a problem there where even silence is a performance where, I think Pamela Allen Brown shows beautifully how Ophelia is not just a passive object of the sort of ranting of the male characters. And then I come to my two points where I feel, you really given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm really, really grateful for helping me rethink some ideas. One is that I have profound sympathy with your idea, if I understand it correctly, that the diva, by transgressing certain cultural boundaries, also help us explore alterity and otherness. That, for instance, racial impersonation on the part of the diva is not just a way, as we would say in modern terms, of appropriating other cultures, but also of exploring other culture, which I think it's a very important and topical issue. My problem is perhaps more terminological, because I'm not entirely convinced about where one can draw the line between a racialized impersonation and non-racialized impersonation. When does an impersonation become racialized? Why is impersonating Italians racialized? Because I think there is a problem that sort of haunts me about how is the contemporary American politics of race that is somehow projected back onto early modern society. So on the one hand, I agree with you and some of the scholars that you quote that race is not a completely modern phenomenon. Certainly the roots of race and racism and racial thinking goes back way back to the Middle Ages. But it's interesting that we use and you use, the category of race when you talk about Moors and Turks, but now also Italians. Where do we draw the line? Where is impersonation ethnic, just ethnic, and when it becomes racial? So that may be a point I would like you to clarify. Last but not least, of course, there was a wonderful chapter on Porsha from The Merchant of Venice. And clearly this is a chapter that I was particularly interested in because of The Merchant of Venice, means a lot. in many ways, but also because I have been thinking a lot about this interesting critical debate that exists and you somehow evoke between, let's say, Shylock-oriented readings of The Merchant of Venice and Porsha-oriented reading of The Merchant of Venice. You point out that is a seeming paradox. Porsha is the character in Shakespeare that by far has more lines, more scenes, speaks more than Shylock, speaks more than Antonio, and yet Shylock has held center stage in Shakespeare criticism. You also put in a footnote a generous reference to the fact that we in Venice organized, 2 years in a row, a seminar called Shylock's Venice, because in fact we were thinking about the anniversary of the Ghetto Venice in 2016. And that kind of debate is a very interesting debate because it somehow pits, let's say, Jewish readings of the play or anti-Semitic readings of the play versus feminist readings of the play. And you appropriately mentioned Howard Jacobson, who's a great novelist who's written a book, and he is the type of Jewish reader who has horrible things to say about Porsha, because Porsha is the character who basically forces Shylock to convert, forces Shylock to lose the trial, the lawsuit, basically. And so let's say, I wouldn't call it an objection because that would be a kind of legal term, as it were. But the point I would like to raise is, I somehow felt that in your chapter about Porsha, you didn't address perhaps the fact that one of the reasons why Shylock has become so prominent in merchant criticism is because, of course, he represents minority, and of course there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of bad conscience about how much attention is given to Shylock. It's incredible how many directors today who want to stage a Merchant of Venice go out of their way to make Shylock a good guy, when Shylock is clearly not a good guy. It's simply not a good guy. But the problem is that I'm exaggerating a bit here, I think you seems to make Porsha too much of a wonderful, successful diva, and I don't think you address the fact that in order to be this extraordinary woman who pushes the boundaries, who crosses the boundaries, the limits of women's social roles, she's a great rhetorician, she's a great legal thinker, she's really an astounding diva. But to achieve that success, and by, let's say, crossing the boundaries of womanhood or the women script in society, she ends up by reiterating the confirming and forcing the boundary of religion and the political boundaries of Venice. So in order to be this great diva, she also has to endorse and champion the law of the majority that even force Shylock to become a Christian. In the original of Shylock, Il Pecorone, at the end of the play, at the end of the tale, it's not even the end of